Right, we're at about 5 after the hour. Um, Good afternoon. I am Jim Roland. I am the Bureau Chief for the Planning Procurement Bureau within the IPA, and I'll say, co-host for this session, along with Fun Singh from E3. I'll introduce her in a couple minutes, along with Anthony Starr, who is Senior Advisor here at the IPA, who will be co-presenting on a few slides as well. To make sure you're in the right spot. The purpose of this workshop is really a walkthrough of the recently released RPS budget forecast model. It's intended to provide some insight and information to all of you as stakeholders on kind of the new forms and formation that we'll go through in these slides, kind of giving you an overview, walkthrough of things, and so on. Um, so to begin the process, what I'd like to do first is just give you a kind of an overview here agenda. There's going to be some housekeeping slides, background as well, a brief discussion of why we're here, an overview, a very brief overview of the goals of the updates made to the model itself. And then we're going to go through a live demonstration. So there'll both be some slides that'll provide an overview of kind of changes made organizationally and so on, and then a literal live demonstration of the model itself, the Excel workbook that and how it kind of flows. And then we're going to open a pretty substantive portion of the time to question and answers. So those Q&As are hopefully going to be about half of our time. You're welcome to raise your hand or post in the chat itself to this meeting, the Zoom meeting, if you have questions. I'm going to try to cultivate them as we go, but generally speaking, unless you have a question about something we're talking about at this point, as we kind of go through, I'd ask if you could to hold your questions or throw them in that written chat so that we can keep them to the end. That way we'll have all the questions more or less at the end of the presentation. Um, so from a housekeeping perspective, first and foremost, for those of you that may have just joined, the recording itself, this entire presentation is going to be recorded and posted on our website. So the purpose of that is so that you in the future can come back or your teams can come back and re-listen if of value. We can also use it for other stakeholders that may not have been in the process. So you can refer to it and kind of understand what comes through. So don't necessarily feel a need to write copious amounts of notes, trying to record every word unless you really want to, because this will be posted. The presentation that I'm using right now will also be posted, so you can refer to that. So for instance, the resource links that are at the bottom here, you'll have access to and so on. So all this will be up there. We're hoping to do so probably first thing tomorrow. If we can get it into our queue at the latest, it'll be Tuesday of next week. And only reason Tuesday is because Monday is a holiday. So at the latest, early next week, you'll be able to access it. I'm going to try to get it into our updates though for sometime tomorrow if I could. One of the other points I wanted to highlight here from a disclaimer perspective is this kind of workshop, this session is really more of a training session. It's not intended to really go into the nuances of the inputs, why we input what we did, how we used it, what other inputs there could be to say change the results or alter different pricing structures or alter procurement structures and so on. So as we're going to go through and you'll see here, first, the changes in the model, the inputs are really, we could do for example purposes. So if we change a number as we go through here, it's purely just to show kind of what could be done, how it could be done, and how it flows through, not necessarily because we're putting forward an idea of this is what a value should be. And similarly, you're going to see there's capabilities within the tool that allow for scenario and scenario building and then result design. Again, it's purely illustrative. So you could go into it and alter them. You could create your own because it ultimately is an Excel model. So you could go and add your own scenarios in a different worksheets or workbooks that connect in on your own end. And as we go through this, anything we would do here is purely illustrative, just to show you again how the tool's currently designed and what some of the functionality and capabilities are within it. So the last point here before I hand it off to Anthony from a background perspective is why we're here. So in touching the disclaimers before, it's a workshop to explore how the workbook itself functions. It give all of you insight into what's been improved, altered, and adjusted. There's a number of changes that you've seen, some purely visual. So if you would have looked at prior workbooks and the tools themselves relative to where we're at now, you're going to see just literally visual differences. It's organized differently. There's different color coding and so on. Um, so we're going to go through all of that. There are different inputs located at different points. There's different flows, data flows from one section to another. There's also scenario building that to some extent really didn't exist in the prior one. So the purpose of this is to aid all of you maybe looking at this for the first time to gain understanding of how we've organized what we've done. Hopefully the point of making it easier for all of you to use. It certainly is easier now for us to use and track flows through. To that point, though, we're not here to look at kind of reasonableness of things, changes in methodology, and so on. It's that is extremely important to us. We've asked multiple times throughout processes, and will do so going forward into, what is appropriate, what changes should we be considering in methodologies. We did that for the drafts that have been issued out to this point and going forward. And as many of you probably expect, if don't already know, we've started our 2026 long-term plan development, and I expect that in June, date to be determined yet, we will have a stakeholder session, written at least, if not also virtual, like we're having here, to gain insight to some of those items for all of you. So I'd say they're extremely important to us. Please definitely begin thinking through that if you haven't already about things we should be considering, or reinforcements, things you think work well and you want to ensure we continue, so that we can have that dialogue in June when we have that session. So with that said, Anthony, for the next few slides, if you could jump on and go through the background.
Sure. Thanks, Jim. So I'm going to give a little bit of a history of how the IPA has approached modeling the budget for the renewable portfolio standard. I'm very excited about the update that we released in May and the significant work our new planning consultant E3 did to restructure the budget. But I think to understand why this is a significant change, it's helpful a little bit to sort of understand the history of the RPS. So before the Future Energy Jobs Act, RPS budgeting was a fairly simple process that was part of our annual development of our electricity procurement plan, which also included the agency's work on renewables, where we really were calculating a budget each year based upon RPS payments from what are known as eligible retail load. These are the customers who haven't switched. And we were only, other than one exception in 2010, we were going out into spot markets each year to buy renewable energy credits. So we had an annual budget, we would go buy RECs, and then we'd move on to the next year. So there was not that much complexity to the budgeting, but there's also significant flaws to it because the original RPS structure in Illinois really did not allow the IPA to procure RECs in such a way to incent the development of new generation. So that was one of the fundamental shifts with the Future Energy Jobs Act, was to a shift of how we are approaching renewables and what we were trying to procure. When we first developed the first long-term plans in 2017 to 18, and then again refreshed in 2020, in those plans, we really only had some pretty basic summary tables of the RPS goals and the budget, and didn't do much sophisticated modeling like what we've developed today to allow us to look at different scenarios. The challenge we had early on, as some of you are probably well remember, is that the structure of the renewable portfolio standard that was created through FEJA had a model where funds were collected and refunded to customers after 4 years if not used. And this created what a lot of advocates called the funding cliff in 2021, where because of the delays in expenditures from projects being delayed from COVID, there was a mismatch between funds being collected and obligations that were coming. And that was one of the key things that FEJA addressed. Next slide. So when FEJA passed and we revised the long-term plan, the 2022 long-term plan was the first time that rather than just having some tables in the plan or an appendix, we actually included a spreadsheet because we wanted to make things more transparent to stakeholders to be able to go in and sort of see the math, have the ability to change values, things like that. But the what we've done since then is sort of make this gradually more and more complicated, complex. So for the 2024 long-term plan, we added in modeling about index direct procurements as we began to have more data, and forward price curves, which is a significant aspect of the impact on the RPS budget, is what would be the future price of electricity and how does that affect index direct prices. We then have subsequently issued updates to the budget forecast in October, February, and May, and have been making incremental improvements. Each time we do it, we obviously update input. So if there's been additional procurements that are done, additional recs under contract, updating those sorts of things. Always looking for, if there's errors in formulas, correcting those. We made a big change in the October version of the RPS update that we allowed for the first time, the ability to toggle on and off whether the model was just showing what was approved through one plan versus what was, kind of projected for future plans. And then in February, when we updated the model, we also put in the ability to put in different forward price curves and switch between them to show the impact of electricity price change assumption on the RPS budget. And then with the version we introduced in May, E3, as we'll go into shortly, did a significant overhaul. It was almost like a gut rehab of going back to the basics of it, making sure the assumptions were consistent, formulas flowed, that there's more, better way of presenting the data, and that's what we'll be running through. And then also very significantly, a much enhanced ability to have additional ability to build out and try different scenarios. So that's what we're going to be presenting and showing you today. And as Jim mentioned, this ultimately will feed into the 2026 long-term plan scheduled for release in August, where based upon feedback we hear here, as well as subsequent stakeholder feedback opportunities, we're going to continue to refine how we should show and display and explain the RPS goals and the RPS budget so that people have the best information available in looking at the policy choices we'll need to make for that plan. Jim?
Thanks, Anthony. So I'm going to move forward and spend almost no time in this slide because I want to get you all into the presentation of the updates to the tool itself. But these are the four major, super kind of like 50,000 foot view changes we made to the model. So first is, of course, as Anthony mentioned, the regular update changes to the inputs. We do that every cycle when we go through. The second is kind of the structural reformatting of the model itself from the prior approach to what we have now that's more streamlined, which goes into the third. That model itself is also improved to increase understanding and use of the tool. And then finally, the incorporation of scenario modeling. One of the things you'll notice are not on here is we did not change the methodologies within the tool itself. So that is something that can only really be done through long-term plan. So any methodological changes are being put to the side, considerations for any of those, whatever they could be, to the long-term plan development. This is just the structural changes to kind of the flows themselves within the tool. So with that said, I actually want to quickly move into the next piece here. And Funseng Liu is from the E3 team, a consultant for our planning and procurement group here at the IPA. Funseng, I'll actually really hand it off to you. You can kind of go through these and just let me know when you want to flip between slides.
Yep, sounds good. Thank you so much, Jim and Anthony. And yeah, hello, everybody. My name is Fang Xing. I'm a managing consultant here at E3. And we, as Jim suggested, we essentially restructured the entire model. And then how I'm going to structure the next section is I have a few slides to really kind of describe on the high level the updates we made and also kind of a overview of the current model. And then next, we'll actually open the model and then kind of go through a few key sections and like going through like a few examples of how to change some of the key inputs and scenarios, really to give you an idea. But then also in the meantime, definitely feel free to reach out at the end on any other examples that we can show in terms of playing around with the model. But to start, this is essentially a more detailed slide of what Jim just mentioned. To kind of summarize, we essentially made four major updates that really related to the functionality of the model. So in terms of the calculation, we didn't change anything. We didn't change most of things compared to the previous model, but what we did change was really to restructure the model such that it is more user-friendly for stakeholders and also for IPA. So starting from the top left corner, the biggest change we made was we really structured the model such that it follows an input calculation and output structure. And we hope that this really makes the entire model flow better. And then also for the stakeholders to know exactly how one thing leads to another. And then going afterwards, in terms of the color coding, we really made sure that the cells in the entire model follows a consistent set of color coding, such that includes the inputs, the calculation, and essentially the outputs. So I would say for the stakeholders, probably what you would be interested the most is the input and the drop-down input section. So wherever you see a yellow or orange cells, feel free to look at what it says and feel free to change the numbers that play around with different scenarios. But we wouldn't recommend you to change, for example, the calculation cells or really the rest of the result cells, because everything will flow directly to the summary tables and eventually the output charts and graphs. And then the third one is another thing that we'll dive deeper in this presentation, which is we now we intentionally accommodate multiple adjustable variables as well as scenarios that stakeholders can play around with and see how each variable may change the final key output. And I listed a few examples here, and we can kind of dive deep into kind of a few key ones. And then finally, we made a few methodology updates and corrections of the previous model. I'm not gonna dive into them here, but all of them is documented in the latest update that we just published. All right, with that, want to spend a few slides kind of first to describe the model for those of you who haven't really kind of dived deep into the model or even open it. Then we'll kind of open up the model and then look at them in detail. So on a high level, this model is organized in 4 main sections: the cover, the outputs, and 2 major calculation sections that really calculates the rack deliveries and spending for the index rack programs and the adjustable block programs or Illinois Shines program. The cover, pretty straightforward, has some general information and the color coding for you to follow. The output sections has quite a bit of materials, and I think this will be a key section that we'll kind of talk through a little bit more. And then the index rack and ABP are 2 big sections that really has the most complicated calculation that leads to the final rack deliveries as well as rack spending results that feed into the output section. So I want to kind of go over them briefly, one section by section. So maybe we can go on to the next slide. So the next few slides is really organized by the middle column are all the tabs that you will see when you open up the model, and I will show you later as well. And then kind of a small sentence of description just to orient everybody on what each tab does. So cover, just one tab, general inputs, feel free to look through them. And then maybe we'll spend some time on the next section, the outputs section. So Jamie, if you could move on to the next one. Yeah, this section has quite a few of tabs going from top to bottom. The first tab is called a scenario dashboard. It essentially hosted a different scenarios that has a different example of procurement volumes and prices and some of the rate collection cases, and then also has some summary results and charts. And we'll kind of go into that when we actually open up the model. The next tab is Chapter 3, Tables and Graphs. It's essentially hosted all the latest graphs that we updated for the Chapter 3 of the long-term renewable report. And finally, the last 4 tabs are kind of more comprehensive summary of the results that we really kind of care, I guess, for this model. So those are the RAC delivers by group, or also by a long-term plan, and also the RPS balance, which really calculates kind of the total RPS collection from rates, the total RPS expenditures, and finally the end of year balance for each year. The RAC delivers calculate both the contracted as well as the projected RAC deliveries from a variety of groups, and also organized by both the state and also by different entities. So by Ameren, by ComEd, and by Mid-American. And finally, is the RAC spending that calculates the expenditures by each program and also for each entity. So those, I think I envision that for stakeholders, you probably will spend the most time looking through some of the results and then play around with different scenarios. But yeah, we'll kind of dive deep into those. And then next are the two kind of more detailed calculation for both the indexed RAC and the adjustable block programs. The way we organize these two sections are, you see the tabs on the top are generally the outputs that feed directly into the output section. And then the tabs at the bottom are typically the inputs that we put in. And then the tabs in the middle are typically just intermediate calculation. So taking index RAC section as an example, here we see that the top two tabs are essentially the outputs for the index RAC. Those are the RAC deliveries as well as the RAC spending. And then the three tabs at the bottom are essentially the key inputs to the RAC section. Those are the RAC prices, the strike prices, and also other inputs for this program. And then finally, going to the adjustable block program is a slightly more complex calculation, but essentially following the same structure. So the first two tabs that you will see when you open up the model are the key outputs. So those are the RAC deliveries as well as the RAC spending. And we have a few backend calculations in the in the middle that I'm not gonna dive into the details, but then probably for the stakeholders, you may want to check out the inputs sections as well. So those are, for example, the inputs by program, the last third tab of this section includes like the block capacity share or the capacity factors by each type of program, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the inputs that you could play around with and see how that, in fact, like how that impacts the final outputs. So I guess to summarize, everything in this model is flowing through. So if you change any input cell that's marked in orange or yellow, you will see the results reflected or updated in the final output section. And then we encourage you to only change the input cells rather than the calculation or other types of cells. With that, I think I'm gonna start to opening up the model and really kind of talk you through some of the examples. So maybe kind of the roadmap for the demo is I'll walk through kind of the min outputs just to again orient everybody, and you will see that that's exactly how I just presented in the slide format. And then we'll look at how to change the scenarios in the scenario dashboard tab. And also I'll show a few examples of how to change a few of the key inputs. And then finally, we'll leave plenty of time for folks to ask questions or raise any other requests for me to illustrate. All right, with that, let me share my screen and then we can go over them together. All right, I assume folks can see the screen, but let me know if it's not coming up. So this is essentially the kind of the workbook you will see if you download it from the IPA website and you open it from your laptop. So I'm really kind of just starting from the beginning. And I first want to draw everybody's attention to all the tabs. So here you can see that. Let's see if I can close it a little bit just so I can click through. All right, here we go. So first, I want to kind of show everybody the main tabs. As I mentioned, these tabs are organized as what I just presented by 4 sections. We have the cover, we have all the main outputs, we have the index recs calculation section, and finally we have the ABP or adjustable block program or Illinois Shines calculation section. And then next, I'm gonna dive straight into the scenario dashboard because I think that probably will be the most useful tab for you all to start. And I recognize this is very small. I first want to go over kind of the overall structure of this tab, and then we'll kind of zoom in and then dive deep into smaller details. So essentially what this tab does is on the left hand of this tab, the stakeholders can put in different inputs or adjust different scenarios. So this section you can consider as an input section. And then on the right of this tab are essentially the key outputs. So we have a summary table, and we also have a whole bunch of we think probably are useful charts, and we can go through some of the key ones on the right, and everything will flow through in this tab. So first, I want to zoom in on what inputs that stakeholders or users can change at this point. So if we zoom in into the input section, right now on this scenario tab, a dashboard is loaded with 3 scenarios: the 2024 baseline, the policy compliance with 2 different rate increases, and then users can kind of toggle between different scenarios, and the results will automatically populate on the right. And in terms of the difference between the 3 scenarios, we essentially, each scenario has different combination of 3 main inputs. So those are the index rec procurement that is organized by resources, so by wind, by solar, and by brownfield, and also by procurement year. We also have different inputs for the adjustable block program projected procurement. So this is organized by the total capacity for the entire state. And finally, we have a section that shows the RPS rate collection for each utility that's also organized by procurement. So let's say right now we have a scenario loaded for the 2024 baseline. Essentially what the model is doing is this active table is reading through the inputs from the section below. So this is the section that's corresponding to the 2024 baseline. So if users want to say change some of the inputs, for example, if we want to not procure, say, the index rec for after 2033, we would just set everything as 0. And then if we hit calculate, the outputs will automatically adjust. So those is kind of one demo to show how you can change different inputs and also toggle between different scenarios. And as Jim mentioned it earlier, a reminder that all of these scenarios are purely for illustrative purpose and really to kind of anchor as really serve an example to show that what different scenarios might look like. Let's see what other inputs might be useful. So maybe one more thing that users can also change is the dollar per megawatt hour of rate rate collection that could be applied for RPS procurement. So right now, the 2024 baseline is reflecting the current approved rate collection, but then there are also other potential scenarios that the rates could change, again, in a hypothetical world. So those are the input section. Maybe I also want to spend some time to go over the results. So some of the key results that we summarize here, for example, the total RPS target that is directly linked to the utility sales as well as the percentage RPS goal by year. And this table summarizes the REC deliveries with the current scenario. We also see the gap if the current REC procurement does not meet the current RPS target. And then maybe some other useful numbers to look at is the end of year balance from a state perspective. And finally, some of the useful charts, a few that we find it particularly useful to look at it is this chart that shows the RPS goal that is in the red line versus the achieved RPS percentage. So that is in gray bar. And also one more, this chart is showing the year-end RPS balance that exactly matches the table that I just mentioned. So column Z, and then a whole bunch of others that feel free to take a look and yeah, look at whatever that might be useful for your purpose. So that's the scenario dashboard. Maybe just to loop in some of the other tabs that might be familiar with some of you who are kind of who have some familiarity with the previous RPS model. This tab that essentially summarizes the key tables and graphs for the long-term plan, chapter 3, and then maybe to show one kind of comprehensive result tab. So this tab that's showing the RPS balance, the way it's organized is it's organized by the state, so on the top, and then by the 3 utilities, so Ameren, Comment, and Mid-America. And then they all follow the same column name, so feel free to look those as well. Let's see, want to leave enough time for folks to ask questions. So maybe let me show one more thing on like how to change the other a few key inputs. Maybe one thing that maybe we should go back to the scenario dashboard is here, users can change different forward price versions. So right now the model is preloaded with the March 30th version. So let me zoom in just so folks can see what that means for the impact of different inputs. So pay attention to the chart on the right in terms of the REC spending and collection. So if we move to a different prices version, say let's use April 28th, you may see that the spending and collection changes because this price the forward price directly impacts the index REC spending and therefore the total REC expenditure. Maybe just go back and forth so that folks can see just by toggle between different forward price version, the REC spending collection will change. And then also similarly, the end of year RPS balance will change as well. So that's one input that folks can take a look. Maybe kind of going into the details of specific programs. Let's go to indexed REC program. So here, this table summarizes the prices for different forward price versions. So this essentially directly feeds into the drop-down menu that's in the dashboard, in the scenario dashboard. But then also you see a bunch of other yellow cells that stakeholders could change. One example is, for example, we could also change the annual degradation for different types of programs. And then if you want to change the strike prices that's in the index REC strike price section, that's right here. So the strike prices are organized by procurement year, and you could change these based on kind of your scenarios and see how that impacts the final results. All right, the last thing that I want to show before we open up the floor is perhaps the reg prices for the adjustable block program. So I think that's here. I guess this kind of going to the adjustable block program reg prices tab. Right now, we preloaded the reg prices for each program by procurement year. Might be a little bit too small for folks to see. Not sure if it's getting better. But one thing that stakeholders could change is how the reg prices change year by year. So right now, in the inputs by year section, we have this cell that assumes 4% of annual increase for the reg prices, maybe just to zoom in a little bit for folks to see. So if we change this to a different percentage, that will directly flows into the ABP reg prices tab that would adjust that the reg prices change year by year. And while we are here, you can see that there are also a whole bunch of other yellow cells that you could change, and hopefully we named each section clearly that really shows what each input represents. All right, with that, I think that is enough to start the conversation. I'm going to stop and maybe open the floor for questions and requests on any kind of other demo that will be useful for folks to see.
Great. Thanks, Funseng. So what we're going to do now is move to what I'll say is the Q&A section of this workshop. So at this point, again, to kind of repeat from both a housekeeping point as well as kind of interaction with us, you can either post questions that you have in the chat. The chat is at typically the bottom of your screen with the suite of buttons that are there. Or if you would like to ask a verbal question, I'd ask you to hit the react button and raise your hand. That way I can just kind of queue you up and walk my way through those of you that may have questions on kind of the functional use of the tool and kind of how it navigates. And we can go from there. Again, we're looking for any and all questions that you might have on navigation, orientation, kind of where to find things, how to work things within this tool, so we could help you with you and your functional use of the model. So we'll just take a second here and let folks kind of gather up, ask questions, kind of raise hands, and we'll unmute in a second here. Right at this moment, I still don't see anyone queued up. We'll give you another second here. And the other thing that you can do while we're seeing if anyone has questions, you start to gather up is if you go through the tool, you have questions and you're unable to kind of figure out something, you don't know where to go for something. Please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out to us at the contact us at contact.us@illinois.gov, which is our normal IPA email, and the administrator can get that over to us. And as I said at the beginning, we will be going into greater depth on kind of the inputs, the methodological considerations in the next plan's development, which we're expecting to have a workshop or at least a outreach for stakeholder feedback probably near the middle to end of June, just as we kind of queue things up and get that going. So I would ask that if you have any questions to that effect, definitely get them ready. We will have a session for that where you can both ask questions, make recommendations, submit them more formally to us. This both ties to the process we had back in January with AVs asking about kind of different principles and concepts into inputs within how they do what they do with their projects, things we should be considering for inputs into the tool that may need to make its way in here, as well as when we've done subsequent updates asking for feedback to them. When we issued, for example, rec prices, which is, as Funsing had showed, is a piece. One of the screens under ABP shows the rec prices. We'll also be including a request for that as part of the stakeholder session in June. Again, going into the inputs, what we should be considering, why we should be considering them, kind of how that flows through. So you'll really get an end-to-end both in that model and the tool that got us to that result, as well as this one and how it ultimately rolls up to the RPS budget. So I'm going to check one more time. I have not seen any hands raised, so I won't belabor this, knowing that we did throw a lot of information at you. Hopefully, what we've provided was helpful. So with that, I'll give another quick 30-second here wait just to see if anyone raises their hand. Otherwise, we can end the call, kind of dismiss everybody. Definitely please go play with the tool, use it, see what questions and comments you might have, send them our way. We'd be happy to answer them and help guide you through the tool and its use. And like I said, coming up at the end of June, we'll be soliciting for additional information on inputs and methodology changes and so on. Great, not seeing any hands. Again, really appreciate your time and consideration through the process. Looking for any and all feedback that you have, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.